When I was 12, my family moved into an old duplex. My room was in the converted attic, cramped with slanted ceilings and one small window. The previous tenant had left behind a shoebox in the closet. Inside were dozens of Polaroid pictures, all of the same thing. Our backyard, taken from my window at different times of day. I showed my parents, but they said the previous tenant was probably just into photography. They threw the box away. That should have been the end of it. But then I started finding new Polaroids. One on my dresser, one tucked in my textbook, one under my pillow. All recent photos. Our car in the driveway, my dad mowing the lawn, my mom getting the mail. Someone was still taking pictures. The thing is, I never heard anyone come into my room. I started staying awake, watching the door. Nothing. But the photos kept appearing, sometimes 2 or 3 a week. They were getting closer, zooming in on our windows, our faces through the glass. Then one morning, I found a Polaroid on my nightstand that made my blood run cold. It was a photo of me, asleep in my bed, taken from inside my room. You could see the angle. Whoever took it had been standing right next to me. I ran downstairs screaming. My parents called the police. They searched everything, closets, attic, crawl spaces. Nothing. But when they checked the closet in my room, they found something that still makes me sick to think about. Behind the back wall, there was a gap, just wide enough for someone to slip through. It led to a hollow space between the duplex walls, running the entire height of the building. Inside, they found blankets, food wrappers, and a whole box of Polaroids we'd never seen, hundreds of them. Photos of us eating dinner, watching TV, sleeping. The worst part? Some of the photos were dated from before we even moved in. Whoever it was had been living in our walls for years, photographing the previous tenants too. They never caught them. We moved out within a week. To this day, I check behind every wall and every place I live, and I never ever keep my bedroom door closed at night. From ages 10 to 15, I spent 2 weeks every summer at my aunt and uncle's beach house in Oregon. It was pretty isolated, about a mile from the nearest neighbor, right on a rocky stretch of coastline. My uncle worked odd hours doing maintenance for the county, so he was often gone at night. The house was old, probably built in the 1960s, and it had this weird layout where my bedroom was separated from the main house by a breezeway. Basically, I was sleeping in what used to be a garage that they'd converted. My aunt said it gave me privacy, but honestly, it just felt creepy being so separated at night. The first couple summers were fine, but the summer I turned 13, I started hearing things at night. Footsteps on the gravel outside my room, tapping on the window. I'd look out and see nothing but darkness and fog. The ocean was loud, so I convinced myself I was just hearing waves and rocks. One night, I woke up and my door was open. I knew I'd locked it before bed because I was paranoid about the isolation. I got up to close it and noticed muddy footprints on my floor. Small prints, like from a kid's shoe. They led from the door to beside my bed, then back out. I was terrified. I ran to the main house and woke up my aunt. She seemed more annoyed than concerned and said my uncle had probably checked on me when he got home from work and tracked in mud. But my uncle wasn't even home that night. He was working a night shift. My aunt didn't really have an explanation after that. She just cleaned up the footprints and told me to keep my door locked. The next day, I noticed she'd put a new deadbolt on my door, the kind you can only lock from the inside. Nothing else happened that summer, but I never felt comfortable there again. I started sleeping with a chair propped against the door, even though it had the new lock. It wasn't until years later, at a family gathering, that my cousin mentioned something weird. She said when she'd stayed there years before I did, she'd also heard footsteps and found her door open at night. My aunt had given her the same explanation about my uncle checking on her. My aunt overheard us talking and got really quiet. Then she admitted that when they first bought the house, the realtor had mentioned a local kid had drowned near the property in the early 2000s. The family sued the previous owners, claiming the property wasn't properly fenced, and the kid had wandered onto the rocks. My aunt said she hadn't wanted to scare us kids with the story. I don't know if that explains anything. Maybe there was someone living rough on the property who we never caught. Maybe it was an animal I misinterpreted. But those muddy footprints were definitely from shoes, and they definitely walked right up to my bed. My aunt and uncle sold that house about 5 years ago. I've never asked them if anything else happened there. In 5th grade, our teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, went on maternity leave for the last 2 months of school. The substitute they brought in was this younger woman named Miss Perry. She seemed nice enough, probably in her late 20s, always wore professional clothes, kept the same lesson plans Mrs. Rodriguez had left. But there were these small, weird things I noticed. Her handwriting on the board would sometimes change throughout the day. Like she'd start with neat print, and by afternoon it would be messier cursive. She'd occasionally call students by the wrong names, but not like mixing up Sarah and Sally. She'd use completely different names, names of kids who weren't in our class. The strangest thing was when she'd have conversations with empty desks. We had 2 students who'd moved away earlier in the year, and their desks were still in the classroom but empty. Miss Perry would sometimes call on those desks during discussions, wait a few seconds like she expected an answer, then move on. When someone would point out nobody sits there, she'd look confused for just a second, then continue teaching. A few of us talked about how weird she was, but she wasn't mean or anything, so nobody really reported it. Plus, she was only there for 2 months. The weird part came at the end of the year. Mrs. Rodriguez came back for the last week to say goodbye to us before summer. I mentioned Miss Perry and thanked Mrs. Rodriguez for having such good lesson plans for the substitute. Mrs. Rodriguez looked at me confused and said there hadn't been a substitute, that she'd only taken 6 weeks off, not 2 months, and her mother had covered the class a few days here and there. She showed me the school calendar where she'd marked her return date. It was exactly 6 weeks from when she'd left, not 2 months. I was so confused. I asked other kids, and about half of them remembered Miss Perry clearly. The other half remembered Mrs. Rodriguez's mom covering the class, and Mrs. Rodriguez being gone only a few weeks. It was like we'd experienced different timelines. I still have some of my homework from that period. Some of it is graded in handwriting that doesn't match Mrs. Rodriguez's style at all. It's messier, more rushed, and uses different colored pens than Mrs. Rodriguez used. But according to the school records, Mrs. Rodriguez graded everything herself. I found out later from my mom that there had been some weird administrative mix-up that year. Apparently, someone had been approved as a long-term substitute for our class, but then Mrs. Rodriguez changed her leave plans and came back early. My mom said maybe that substitute had worked a few days before they realized the mistake. But that doesn't explain why some of us remember 2 full months, while others remember only a few weeks. It doesn't explain the empty desk conversations or the name mistakes. I'm in my 20s now, and I recently looked up the school's staff directory from that year out of curiosity. There's no record of any Miss Perry ever working there, but I have those graded assignments in a box somewhere. The handwriting is real. Something happened during those weeks that doesn't quite add up, and I don't think I'll ever know what it was.